All right. So for the people virtually, what we discussed during the time, there was a blackout. And during the blackout, we discussed a little bit of Pug, like how does Pug actually work. We discussed how the internet actually worked. We discussed how Facebook actually worked. And then we started to re-implement Facebook ourselves on the board over there. Unfortunately, we did not get very far. But now we're going to move back to things that we're working on. So everybody good on Pug? Yes, no, a little bit? Yes, good. So now we're going to talk about when we actually want to run JavaScript on the front end and how we're going to do that. So how are we going to do that? So first we need to have a JavaScript file, right? And so that JavaScript file lives in app/. So was everybody able to pull from the bootcamp folder and now has the folder coupon front end? So everybody go ahead and open up that folder. So we have all these files. And so the JavaScript that we write that will run on the front end, we could write it directly in each view, but that doesn't become very recyclable. We could write it in the template, which is now starting to get bad because we're crossing over between controllers and views. So we're going to keep it in its separate file in JS within the app directory. So the script file that we're going to work on is in /app/script, so we can go look at it. I already pre-wrote a lot of the JavaScript. We have stuff to create a modal. Does anybody know what a modal is? Has anybody used a modal? It's a pop-up. It's a nice way of having a pop-up that doesn't actually pop up. You'll see what I mean in a second. We have this function that will eventually submit a form, but it doesn't yet. We have a function that will throw an error that doesn't do anything yet. We have clear error. We have validating a phone, which is just that function that I wrote that whether it works or doesn't work is personal preference. And by that, I mean you can give it letters and it'll just ignore the letters. So 1, 2, 3, 4, ABC, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0 is a valid phone number according to this algorithm. We have validate email, which is this massive regex, which I just stole from emailregex.com. We have this thing, which will add another field if they choose other in their dropdown. They have clear form, which will clear the form. And they have display error, which will display an error, as well as submit success and submit error, which are empty functions. So we will be building out these functions over the next few minutes. The next 30 seconds, yeah. So what does this look like when it's all minified? If anybody's curious, we can now cd into public, c to JS, and that's what it looks like when it's all minified. And so we do end up saving quite a bit of memory there. You can still see things like that big regex right here. And function clear form is here and stuff like that. But it's all minified and compressed up. Yeah?
How does that make it faster for the browser?
It doesn't make it execute faster, it makes it load faster. Cool. And so now how do we get that to run on the front end? And so when we transpiled our stylus into CSS, how did we get that CSS to be included on our front end? Does anybody remember? Yeah, so we include it within our template. So if we go check out our templates, we see that we have link that has href style sheet /style, which will include our style. We have script get source /js /fetch, which is that fetch polyfill that I was showing. And then at the very bottom, we have script source get /js /script.min.js, which is that minified script. Does anybody know why I have this script up top and this script down below? It was indeed a, yeah.
It's because you want the fetch to be on every single page, right?
Yeah.
So you keep that in the head.
Okay.
Whereas not necessarily.
So you're onto something. So we are editing the template right now. So every single thing that we have in here will get put into every single view that extends this template. So you're on the right track. We definitely want fetch to be as part of every single view. But we also want this script to be part of every single view. So we stuck it in the template. But why may I have put that at the very bottom of the file, whereas fetch is at the very top of the file? Yeah. It has to do with user input. You're definitely onto something there. Yeah. Fetch does need to run first. That is true. But the reason I actually put the script at the bottom is because we wanted the DOM to be built first. Because within our script, we do stuff like document.body or document.get element by ID, and we search for an element. But that script needs to run after the element has actually been created. And if we put the script at the very top of the page before the body will not have been parsed yet. The DOM will not have been created when we try to mess with these elements. And so we have to put the script last so that the DOM gets created before we start to use JavaScript to mess with the DOM. Has anybody used Jquery? Jquery has a method that's called, does anybody remember? Document.onload, which means after we are done loading the document, after the DOM is created, then run the script. And so rather than including Jquery just for that, you can just put the JavaScript at the bottom and you're guaranteed that will happen. And yeah. Yeah, we could absolutely do this, like script, and then start coding our JavaScript here, like var I gets 0, and then console.log I. And this would console.log I. The problem with doing this is we're starting to lose that MVC separation. So we're starting to put controller code within our view. And so we want to split that out. And so that's why we have JavaScript in our separate directory. Make sense? All right, so is everybody comfortable with how we set up our application? Cool, so let's actually start doing things. So let's run the code first to see what happens. What happens if I run node on front end? Uh-oh, cannot find module express. What's my bug? I need to npm install. All right, and now we can run grunt, which will uglify everything for us. Or we could run, over here I have another dev, npm run dev, but instead of running Mongo, it will run grunt, and it'll spawn that off into a separate task. So I can just run npm run dev. For those on Windows, you'll have to change node to no daemon, no daemon to node. And maybe watch won't even work. Those on Windows, I apologize. But those who aren't on Windows, this command will work. And so now it has started the server and it has started the grunt all in one window, so you don't have to have two. Again, unnecessary, but maybe convenient. And so now let's go visit. Localhost /3000. Uh-oh, the site cannot be reached. Does anybody know what my bug is? Yeah, it's 3001. So 3000 was the port that we were running our backend on, but this one is now running on port 3001. And now we have this page, some code that I've provided you, which is just a form. Does it do anything? No, but it exists. And so we are now going to write some front-end validation for this form. So we're going to say, hey, you cannot submit this form without giving us your phone number and choosing a provider. So how are we going to do that? And the answer is with JavaScript. And so if we actually want to inspect our page, we can see that this is the minified HTML And so we have style sheets, which is that style sheet, also minified. And we have our fetch, which is what I ripped off from GitHub. And we have our script, which is exactly the same as what we showed on the server. And so this JavaScript has run. It already did its thing. And so now we're going to start adding to it. So right. Can people read it if it's this size, or does it need to be bigger? People in the back, is this legible? Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Thumbs up. All right. All right, so on the left we have our view. It's an HTML form, so I coded a lot of it for you, but you should be able to read it at least. So we have extends template, which extends the template. We have block content, so this big block gets cut and pasted into the content part. We have a form. We have a title for the form. Then we have some inputs, most of them type text. We have a select, which pulls from our config file. And if anybody looked at the config, we actually have a list of providers that we'll go ahead and work with. And so we pass those into the template, which then creates a drop-down programmatically for those. And then we have a button that submits, but it doesn't actually submit. It doesn't do anything. It's just a button that you can click. Then we have this modal. And what the modal does is it looks like this. So I don't know if you guys have played with this before, but you can actually mess with source code from these developer tools. So I can go ahead and see all of my HTML over here. I see this modal. It says display none, which means it's not showing. And I can just uncheck that, and it will show. So I can say, hey, show, don't show. We can also do this using JavaScript, and that's how we're going to get this to show when we have a success on input, on form submit. All right. So let's go ahead and code this up. So where am I going to start? Does anybody have any idea what am I going to do? So first of all, we want to wire up the functions that we're running over here into our HTML. So we have this thing called submit form. Let's just say all it does is console.log trying to submit. So how do we now get this to be called every single time we press the button? Does anybody know? Yeah, we can just say button on click equals run submit form. Now if we save that, go reload our page, every time we click submit, if we go look at the console, we see A trying to submit. And if you see, this number is getting incremented, and it's not just showing a bunch. So again, if we click that, trying to submit. We also can do things like alert. We can say, when they submit the form, console.log that, but also alert, trying to submit. Save that, reload the page. If we press submit, it'll alert us, hey, we're trying to submit. So that's cool, right? Now we have our JavaScript wired up with our view. So now we probably want some front-end validation, right? And so we can do that. And so on line 2, we see var form gets document.getElementById by ID, sign up form. If we look over here, we see form has an ID of JS sign up form. So this we will actually need to change to JS sign up form. And now form is that entire form, its variable. So if you look up the documentation on document, you'll see it has classes like getElementById, which you feed it a string, and it'll look up to see if there's any elements with that ID in your DOM. It also has getElements by class name, and you can have an array of elements by a certain class name. You can do stuff like an element dot first child, and it'll grab you the first child. And you can target different elements like that using vanilla JavaScript. So you may have been used to jQuery's $, then you pass it some CSS selector, but you can do the exact same thing more quickly using vanilla JavaScript. And so now form is that form. We can do, on submit form, we could say console.log that form. And so when we click the button, we should be able to print out the form. And we see what's logged is that entire HTML form. Uh-oh, I see a bug. This should be... So what I did is I had a remnant from Jade, which was the old version of Pug. The syntax changed a little bit, so I changed it back to Pug syntax, where option down here, the value should be p.name rather than the hash brace p.name. So ignore that for now. It doesn't really matter. But now we can see that console.log form will actually print out the entire form. So we have successfully, via line 2, gotten that entire form. And so we might see over here, each form input also has a name. And so we can use that name to target any of these inputs. What does that mean? Let's actually just move to the front end for now. So now I say form is this variable. Right? We already created that variable. How do we target the first name? So we could say, look into the code and say, all right, input the first name. The name of that tag is first capital name. And so I could say form.firstName. And that will get me that particular input. What if I want to get at its value? I can say form.firstName.value. And its value is empty string. What if I change its value? If I run it again, now it's asdiff. And so that's how we get at the values of each of these form inputs. So last name asdiff. We could say form.lastName. And know it's called last name because I look in the code and look up its input's name and get its value. And I can say var full name gets form.firstName.value plus a space plus form.lastName.value. And now I have my full name, which I've programmatically created using the values from the form. Everybody following? Can you read that? Do you want me to make it bigger? It's okay? People in the back, good? All right. So what if we now want to programmatically change how something looks? We can also use JavaScript to target the CSS. So say I want to create a red border around first name. I could do something like form.firstName. And that will get me this input. If I hover over it in the console, it'll tell me it's right there. Say I want to change its style. How would I do that? I could say form.firstName.style gets whatever I want. I could say background style dot background color. And the reason I have to use brackets rather than the dot is because you can't have a dash within bracket notation. So I have to do bracket and then the string form of background dash color. I can set that to some absurdly bright green. So RGB. And now it's bright green. And I can say, oh, I did not want to do that, so set background color to empty string and it'll reset it. Whoa, I see some amazed faces. So what if we wanted to highlight it in red? We could do form.firstName.style.border gets maybe a border of 3 pixels that are solid, and let's make it bright red, so that's RGB. And now it has a bright red border. Now we can reset it back. How do we do that? We say the border is actually now empty string, and now it resets. Pretty cool, huh? You can start showing off to your friends. Now you're learning some cool stuff. Like, look at, I coded Facebook. I can manually change stuff on Facebook. You can, just by targeting their elements using JavaScript. So now how are we going to use this to our advantage to be able to validate an input? Any ideas? Yeah.
Do they create an array of like valid inputs or like some formula for valid input and like check the value that you submit against the array or whatever?
Yeah, exactly. So we know how to target the values. We know what sort of values we're expecting, so we can just compare those two. If they differ, then we'll error in some way. Maybe we'll highlight it in red like we did like that. So in our code, let's now say submit form. Let's say when it actually submits, we'll just console.log really submitting the form. And we'll go and implement that later, but for now, we can ignore. The first thing we want to do is we want to validate that input, right? So let's go ahead and say so we can reference our schema, see what we're actually looking for, what are our required values. It's actually just the phone number and the phone provider. And so if they didn't give us a phone number, we should tell them, hey, you're missing a phone number, and then error or exit without actually submitting the form. So let's first check to see what sort of phone number they give us. So we can say if they don't give us a form.phone, I know it's called phone because I can look over here and look up the name of the attribute, .value. If that doesn't exist, then say we'll just alert, hey, you are missing a phone. And then return, which means exit out of this function. Don't keep going until you actually submit the form. And so if we save this and then reload this page, if we try to submit without giving them a phone number, it'll say, hey, you're missing a phone. Cool. I hear somebody whispering this is such a sketchy website. It is. Now if I just give it any value and submit, now it's really submitting the form because we as hackers were able to surpass their very robust validation. So now let's say, all right, let's make this validation slightly more robust. So I look down and say, hey, look, we wrote a validate phone function, which already will grab that form.phone.value for you. And so rather than checking if form.phone.value, we can just check if validate phone. If that is not true, then we should do something. Make sense? So go ahead and write that. Save. Try to submit without the phone. Hey, you're missing a phone. Try to give something bogus. Hey, you're still missing a phone. Try to give it something correct, but not quite. Hey, you're missing a phone. Give it something that's a valid phone number, and now it submits the form. This phone function also accepts, if you put dashes in, that's fine. It works. If you put stuff like this, it still works. If you put letters, it still works. Is that a bug or a feature? Who knows? But if you now stick another number in, it's now an invalid one. Cool, so now we're getting a little more robust. So we have successfully validated the phone. Now let's validate the email. We wrote a email validation thing, and so we can go ahead and use it. So what does it look like? Returns true if and only if it's valid. And it grabs the form email for us. So we can say if not validate email, then alert invalid email, and then return. All right, let's check this out. Give it a valid phone number. Try to submit without an email. Ooh. Aha. So I was ahead of myself here. So submit with a valid email or valid phone number. Try to give an invalid email, and it will yell at you invalid email. What about no email at all? Is that a valid email? According to our schema, should it be? Yeah, right? Email's not necessary. And so our email validation actually accepts an empty value as valid. So if there's no email input.value, return true. So it's a valid email. Okay. So now we're done with validation of email. Now let's validate what's left. We should validate the provider. And so we could do something like, and so here's now where you have to actually look at the values for providers. And so did everybody change value to just equal p.name over here? So go ahead and do this, otherwise there's a slight bug. I actually wrote validate provider and forgot about it, so I already wrote that for us, so we don't have to rewrite it. So we can just go ahead and call this. Was everybody able to update the view? All right, so let's now do if not. If there's not a valid provider, then we should exit as well. Yeah. Over here, there was a bug where within the select, we had option value gets something other than this. It was, I think, like quote, hash, open curly, p.name, close curly. And so just change that to only p.name. And so now, if you want to read through the validate provider code, you should eventually. But let's go ahead and use it, assume it's right. If we now give it a valid email, valid phone number, and an invalid provider, it'll yell at us invalid provider. What happens if we select other? It's also an invalid provider, and we'll go ahead and add that functionality later. Oh, it does exist. It's a little bit buggy because some JavaScript's missing. But the other thing will pop up. You'll have to give it some sort of value before it becomes a valid provider. Is everybody following what's going on? So essentially, we can go ahead and block the submission of the form by just returning before we submit the form. And we can do other things before we stop. So we could say, rather than alerting, hey, you're missing a phone, we could be more subtle and change the phone, like the border, such that it's a red border like we did before. And so we could do like this, form dot style dot border gets 3 pixels of solid red before we return. So that's just a more subtle way of saying, hey, you messed up. You could also cut and paste this to the email. So we could say form.email.style.border gets this. Cut and paste this so that it's form.provider. Phone provider is called. .style.border. And so you're starting to see me cut and paste a lot of code. That probably means it's time to abstract that out into a function. And so we have this function error with a target. We can say that is now going to be our error function. And so we pass it a target, and what does it do? It takes the target, looks at its style.border attribute, and sets it equal to that 3pix solid red. And so rather than cut and pasting this, we can just go ahead and say, pass to the error function our form.phone. Does that make sense? Anybody still copying it down? Cool. So now we can go over here, type in an invalid email. Did I cut and paste incorrectly? Oh, we have what looks to be a closure issue. All right, we have a closure issue. Anybody volunteer to fix it? Oh. So it looks like what's going on. Actually, what is going on? It's always putting it around the phone. You're correct. You are absolutely correct. Okay, it's not a closure issue. It's a Jordan's dumb issue. So we put validate phone first. And so unless we have a valid phone number, only the phone shows. And so if we do this, then it's the phone provider, because that's what we check after validate email. But validate email is valid if it's empty. If we give it invalid email, then it only checks that. But it never unerrors that. So maybe we should have some mechanism to get rid of this error message. So now that this is valid, it should disappear whenever we change it. And so I also have a clear error function. And so how do we clear an error? We can just do the opposite. Target.style.border gets empty string, which means go back to your default. And so how do we say only clear the error if we're now updating the value? Can anybody think of how we would do that? Yeah.
The button on click simulator.
Yeah, so we can take advantage of that on click. So now let's actually say, as part of the email input, on click, so if we click this, on focus, it's called. So the difference between on focus and on click is only if you physically click it. On focus is if you get to the input via tab or click or enter or any of those. So on focus, let's run clear error. But clear error on what? We need to pass clear error a target, right? And so what is our target? It's going to be form.email. We could pass it form.email. Is there a better way to pass the target if the target is the invoker of the function? Is there any way we can pass an object some sort of keyword that stands for the invoker of a function? This. We can just pass it this, right? And so the target becomes the invoker. So this input is the invoker of that function, and so this becomes form.email. And so we can go ahead and stick this into phone as well. And also phone to provider. And so now, if we give it an invalid phone number, if we focus on it, it goes away. And if we try to submit again, it's still erroneous. If we focus on it, it goes away. And so it worked. Nice. So give it something right, give it a bad email. It's bad, but if we focus on it, it now clears that error. Awesome. So we're making a lot of progress. But now, something that tripped me up is that if you submit a form with multiple erroneous inputs, it only highlights phone number. So how are we going to make it so that it highlights every single error? Can anybody think of a way? Yeah, so we'll get rid of the returns. So that works. Now it'll highlight every bad value. Now we also have the bug where it will submit the form no matter what. So how do we, yeah?
What if you create a boolean and if it hits any one of those three, then the boolean sets to false or something?
Good idea. So we'll create a boolean called bad form, which is false. It's a good form now. But if any of these are bad, then we can say bad form becomes true. And then if it's a bad form, then we can return. Awesome. So now let's go ahead and refresh, try to submit. Oh, look, it highlighted everything that was wrong. What if we give it a bad email? Look, now it highlighted all of those. Does it still work when we click? Does it disappear? Yeah, so we're making a lot of progress. We are writing our own form validation. So now let's make this even better. What if it told us, hey, you're missing a phone number. Hey, you gave us a bad email. And so if you look down here, I've written a display error function. What does the display error do? It finds an error div, which, did I include one? Yeah, right here, JS error message. It will find that. So this should be JS error message. It will find that div and give it a message, and then it'll turn it visible. What? So let's go here, and let's try just working with that. So the function is called display error, and if I pass it, hey, this is a test error, HTML null. It will say, hey, this is a test error. How does it know? Because within our HTML, we have this thing called JS error message, which is just an empty div. It just is there, taking up space. And then when we want to display an error, we say, hey, find that error div, stick in it our message, and make it visible. And so within our CSS somewhere, we have that it's called, our .error message is going to be somewhere in here. We have this, and it will automatically be gone. It's not shown. It's visibility hidden. And so when we populate it, it'll still be hidden. It'll have a value. And then when we say visibility is visible, it will now show itself. And so I actually had a small bug here. Let's call this error message as it was, and then rename this to error message as well. So the bug I changed is change inside the index, change JS-error message or JS-error-message to just error-message. And it will now function as I had originally intended, it will show it in red bold. So you can say display error, something random, and it will fill it with something random. Does anybody not understand how that worked? Cool. And so how are we going to now display to the user an actual error that something went wrong? Well, instead of just passing bad form, let's just pass an error message, which becomes empty string. And so all bad form things, we can just change to error message. And then now this still works if error message return. Why? Because empty string is a falsy value. And so when we coerce it to a Boolean, if we haven't added to error message, then it will be false. And so now let's change this to the error message becomes, hey, missing phone. And we can append to it missing email. This one we can append missing provider. How do we get it on new lines? We can throw HTML in. So let's put a break, and now it will actually have lines in between those. And so if there is an error message, now we should do what? We should display error, that error message that we were passing around, and then go ahead and return. Small bug, now every time we submit, the display error message will never be cleared, so we could just clear it at the beginning. So we could say display error, a blank error. And so now it's going to tell us what we're going wrong. So we could say submit, and it'll say, oh, you're missing a phone, you're missing a provider. Let's give it a good phone. Now you're just missing the provider. Give it a bad email. Now you're missing an email and missing a provider. So now we're starting to add some better UI things. The user knows where they're going wrong. So now all we're missing is the actual submission of the data. And so first we're going to have to extract that data, and then we're going to use a fetch call in order to send it. So let's start to create our data. So we could say, by the time we're down here, we're guaranteed that our data is fine as long as our validation was good. Let's go ahead and make that assumption for now and say var data gets what? So now we need to remember what our backend is looking for. Let's do a shortened version and only pass it the phone and the phone provider. So let's say phone gets what? Form.phone.value. Otherwise, we're going to pass the entire object. Phone provider gets form.phone.provider.value. And let's just say we're going to ignore everything else, just for time's sake. And now let's submit a request. How do we submit a request? Using our favorite new function called fetch. And so fetch takes a couple things. It takes one, a URL. So let's actually submit it directly to our backend. So localhost, we'll have to call it http://localhost, port 3000, and we're sending it to what endpoint? Users. And what method? Post. And so this also takes a object for any configuration that you want to pass it, just like jQuery's Ajax. And so you can go ahead and pass it method gets post. We also want to pass it a body. Oops, I forgot a comma. We also want to pass it a body. This is the weird part. We need to create JSON out of this normal JavaScript object. So the way to do that is json.stringify that data. We are missing one thing. We also need to tell it to expect JSON. And so this, you just have to look up the documentation, but you'd have to do headers gets content type is application/JSON. So don't expect you to know that off the top of your head, but you just have to look up the documentation on that one. And so that's our entire request. So we have submit a request to this endpoint, which we wrote. Headers is just content type equals application.json, and that just means, hey, backend, expect JSON. We're passing it, we're saying, hey, use the post method. And the body is the stringified JSON version of this object that we created up here. That's it. So we want to tell it to do when it's done. So we have a .then, which is a function that takes a parameter. We can call it the result. What shall we do? So the tricky thing about this is it will actually call the then no matter what if the request returns. So even if it returns a 400 or a 404 or a 500, it'll still invoke this then clause. Fortunately, they have written this thing called res.ok. I'm only calling it res because it's the argument of this function, but it's whatever.ok. So if it's not res.ok, we can alert there's an error. Otherwise, what are we going to do? We can go ahead and show our modal. If anybody remembers what the modal looks like, it just says, hey, thank you for registering. It worked. So that's our success message. So how do we show the modal? Well, did I write show modal? I did not. So let's actually just manually show the modal. So we could say modal.display.style.display is block. And I can use that modal variable because we declared it at the very top. Okay, and what happens if there's an error? We can do catch this alert. There was an error. And that is it. So I'm going to run it, intentionally cause an error, and we'll see what the error handler does. Go ahead and refresh. Give it a valid phone number, give it a valid provider. Go ahead and submit. There's an error. Why might there have been an error? And if you see, it's the normal, there was an error with no frowny face, which means it was this one that was run. So can anybody think of why it might have just rejected my request immediately? I'll give you a hint. I never started the localhost server. So I need to go ahead and within the backend code now, I need to go ahead and run that server. So now it's listening at port 3000. I can go ahead, refresh this page, give it something, and say sprint, submit it. There was an error again. What is this one? Man. All right, let me try this real quick. Sorry guys, I have no idea what's going on here. Oh, so there's a little bug because the way we set up the API was it shielded off to anything other than internal requests, and so you can't make a request to it directly. And so I was planning on going over that today, but the blackout caused us to run out of time. So I'll just go over it tomorrow. Does anybody have any questions up until this point? There's nothing wrong with our code other than something that I was going to get into if we had time today, but we don't. So yeah. Yeah, I'll push this code. Any other questions? None? None at all? Do we like front-end JavaScript more than back-end JavaScript? People seem to be more amazed by it. It's pretty cool, huh? Something you can show off to your friends. You can't really show off. Look at this backend that I wrote. Like, oh, nerd. So we have 10 more minutes. I don't know if it would be good to do anything in partners for that time, but let me kill the recording.